tickets for Freedom Summit Chicago are on sale now at freedomsummitchicago.com. That's freedomsummitchicago.com.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Coming up on October 3rd, former Arkansas governor and presidential candidate Mike Huckabee is going to be in town at the Union League Club. He's headlining the Aid for Women 40th anniversary dinner, 40 years of helping women who are in crisis with a pregnancy. Aid for Women is a Catholic crisis pregnancy center, life-affirming pregnancy center I'm affiliated with, and so we're excited to have Mike Huckabee come into town. October 3rd, Aid for Women, Chicago, if you want to get more information on that dinner and otherwise support the good work that Aid for Women does and the pro-life movement more generally, of course, which Mike Huckabee is a hero of. And coming up right now, we have the aforesaid Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor Huckabee, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Good to be with you and Amy this morning, and I'm looking forward to being in Chicago on October 3rd.
Yeah, we're looking forward to having you. And some news out yesterday that I wanted to get your take on. U.S. job openings, 17-year high. Business starts, all-time high. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to thank President Obama for those accomplishments.
That's what I was going to say.
If it weren't for good old Chicago's own Barack Obama, where would we be today? I mean, I cannot begin to tell you how grateful I am for the way that his 8 years just teed it up. Now, it had nothing to do with the fact that President Trump, essentially from day one, rolled back and reversed every economic policy that President Obama had championed, like increasing taxes and increasing regulations and trying to put the energy companies of America out of business and making it more and more difficult for businesses to operate, and even to give all kinds of special treatment to those who were crashing our economy. So that's, I'm sure, nothing to do with President Trump, at least not if you listen to the major networks. But frankly, and all kidding aside, Americans need to be celebrating the fact that the economic policies of deregulation and lower taxes and taking the boot off the necks of businesses has resulted in jobs. And that's the greatest way to fight poverty in the world. Give people a job.
Now, were you surprised when former President Obama broke protocol and spoke on behalf of the Democratic Party? I know the midterm elections are less than 2 months away, but don't you think somebody else could have and should have delivered that message?
You know, Amy, I'm sure it would have been better, and there's been a long history of former presidents not specifically going after the current president. But, I mean, I think we all have to recognize that we're living in a time when there are no rules anymore. There's no sense of propriety. And I don't fault him so much that he said something. I understand he disagrees with President Trump. I'm sure he's a little bit miffed that the current president, has rolled back almost everything he spent 8 years doing. But the other side of that is it gives Americans a great opportunity just to step back, even people who don't like President Trump, and to say, you know, whether I like the guy's personality or not, he's effective. And I say, Amy, he's a lot like the doctor who has been called to come do surgery on you. His bedside manner is deplorable. You know, he's gruff. He can come in and chew out the family for even being in the room. He can be rough on the nurses. But the point is, he's done the surgery 1,200 times, and every patient has survived. Do you want that guy doing your surgery, or a guy who's only done it 3 times and all of his patients have died? I'll take the gruff. I'll be nice, and I'll let the doctor do his magic in the operating room. And this is a president, whether people like his tweets or like some of the comments that he makes, he's a pretty transparent guy. But the fact is, what he does is getting things done, and not just for the economic front, but for those of us who are committedly pro-life. This is, without doubt, the most pro-life president we've ever had, ever. And I think those things matter to people like me.
What about the Republican Party on the Hill, the Republican members of the House and the Senate who have not fulfilled Paul Ryan's promise to defund Planned Parenthood at the federal level after those David Daleiden undercover videos exposing just exactly who Planned Parenthood is and just exactly what they do, the gruesome work that they do. That despite the investigation headed up by Marsha Blackburn, now running for the Senate in Tennessee, and all the evidence presented and state-level investigations, Planned Parenthood continues to marshal on, underwritten by U.S. taxpayers.
Well, any Republican who doesn't actively seek to get rid of the blood money that Planned Parenthood gets and uses to kill unborn children, they should be absolutely defeated. Let somebody come who will do what they say. Republicans promised to defund Planned Parenthood. The fact that they haven't is real, I think, an incredible scourge upon the Republicans who lied to the voters, and they need to go home.
You obviously are a political observer in addition to being a former governor, former candidate. How do you feel, speaking of some of the Trump successes, but also some of the failures, some of the promises not kept? How do you feel 2 months out from the midterms?
I mean, overall, I think if Americans look at this subjectively, which many of them won't, but if they did, they would say, why would we put the Democrats back in power? Why would we put Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi and Elizabeth Warren in place? Why would we give them leadership? Because what we know is not only are they going to try to go after this president, but Nancy Pelosi thought that the tax cuts that gave workers bonuses and pay raises were nothing but crumbs. Well, say that to the families who were able to put better food on their tables, send their kids to summer camp, put money aside for college, add that room on the house that they hadn't been able to do before. Those aren't crumbs. Those are improvements in life. Take Maxine Waters and her hoping that people will go after folks they disagree with, yelling and screaming at them in public places, and doing to them what happened to my daughter in a small little restaurant in Virginia, where just because you have a different point of view, you get run out of public places and you're not allowed to even have a meal with your family. If that's what people want, then vote Democrat. If you love socialism, if you think it works and you love what's happening in Venezuela, vote Democrat. But I cannot imagine that rational, thoughtful, intelligent people would look at sort of a tale of two cities and would say, yep, that's what I'd like. Take more of my money, spend it on wasteful things I hate. And in the meantime, let's go back to a place where we're bowing down before foreign leaders rather than having them really afraid of us and changing what they do and dealing with us.
Governor Huckabee, how did you find out that your daughter was denied service at that restaurant? Did she call you and tell you what happened?
Yeah, we heard about it, pretty soon. And, of course, then it went public and viral. But the real story is a little more intense than what the public has heard. She had driven from Washington to meet her husband and his family at this restaurant. And they were going to stay in Lexington that weekend because her husband's father had gone to Washington and Lee, and it was kind of a weekend with the entire family, and that included the brothers and sisters and all of them. And so when she walked in, the owner was already there. The owner pretended that she was called in by the employees. That's not true. She was already there. When Sarah walked in, the owner went over to her almost immediately, within 2 minutes, and said, "Miss Sanders, may I speak to you? Could you come with me?" Well, Sarah thought it was just to say, "Honored to have you in our restaurant." That why else would an owner come over? And she immediately looked at her, and her face was all twisted up, and she said, "I don't like you. I don't want you in my restaurant. You don't represent the values that we hold dear in this community. I don't appreciate the person you work for and what you do, and I would appreciate it if you would leave my restaurant." And Sarah was just stunned. She went over, whispered into her husband's ear, and said, "I've been thrown out." So he got up and went with her, and he then said to the family what happened. Well, they got up, and they went down the street. Sarah and Brian left, period. She was just no longer even having an appetite, wanted to just go back to where they were staying and forget it. So she went without dinner. But the rest of the family went, and this owner of the restaurant, the little red hen or whatever it's called, walked down the street where they had gone, got on her cell phone, called other people, and then they came down and got out in the street and were yelling and screaming. Finally, one of my son-in-law's, his brother, who is way more liberal than you could imagine, came out and said, "Look, I'm probably more liberal than you. I'm not a Trump supporter, But my sister-in-law is a very nice person, and what you're doing is wrong, and it's ridiculous, and you're creating an embarrassing, unnecessary scene. And then, it was just ugly. Now, here's the long-term effect.
Okay.
As you may have read, that entire community now is really battling because its image has been totally destroyed by that restaurant owner, and they're having to spend an enormous amount of money to try to get people to come back because it's had a big negative effect on tourism. That's unfortunate because it wasn't everyone in that community. But it just shows that when people act selfishly and when they act boorishly and when they act with such hate and bigotry and they bully people, it has an effect not only on their reputation, but unfortunately upon the reputation of those around them.
Well, that is a Paul Harvey quality, and that's the rest of the story.
It's like a mob mentality. I mean, that's scary.
That is not, as you said at the outset, that is not anything close to how this was covered by the D.C. Press Corps, and I'm, of course, not surprised, but those details are really important. Appreciate you sharing that. And I just wonder, going back to Sarah, your daughter, how she is enjoying her time as press secretary, how much she confides in you about the good, the bad, and the ugly of her job.
Well, she loves the job. She knows that it's an extraordinary privilege to be in the position she's in. She said to me just the other day, I was in D.C., which I don't go there very often, but she was saying, when I walk into the White House, there's still a sense of awe and wonder of what this place represents. She said, if I ever get at the place where it just is not real to me, what a privilege it is just to be able to walk in this place, I need to leave. But she has a real appreciation and respect for the president. He treats her wonderfully. She really is frustrated with these stories that keep coming out from people like Bob Woodward and Omarosa, bitter and angry people who will do anything and will say anything and will tell any lie. But what is described in these books about how that there's anxiety and they don't trust the president and they are trying to undermine it, she said that is simply not what happens there day in and day out. And it's just very frustrating to those who are in the true inner circle, not these gutless cowards who write anonymous op-eds for the New York Times, who probably doesn't even work in the White House. But the question is, how do they ever get the press to act with some level of professional responsibility? And so when people say Trump shouldn't be on the press like he is, sometimes he's a little maybe over the top with it. But you know what? If I were being attacked in the relentless way he is, when you have people like Joe Scarborough, who's now become Crazy Joe, who yesterday on 9/11 made the most ridiculous statement dishonoring the 3,000 people killed on 9/11 by saying that President Trump is a greater threat to America than the jihadist on 9/11. I mean, I don't know how a person can say those kind of things and the rest of the media just sit there and applaud or even be silent. How can you say something so outrageous, so utterly disrespectful to people who lost their loved ones in a terrorist attack, and somehow say that the current president is a greater danger to the country than the people who flew airplanes into buildings?
I'll tell you, the combination of what President Obama said at University of Illinois on Friday and what Joe Scarborough, former Republican congressman from Florida, has become is exactly what gave rise to Trump. They're both swamp creatures who are, completely unself-aware and totally self-indulgent. And this is exactly what President Trump was a response to, in my humble opinion. And I think your daughter, Sarah, has done a great job in an unbelievably difficult post. And we appreciate her efforts. And we look forward to having you in Chicago October 3rd for the Aid for Women 40th anniversary dinner. It's going to be at the Union League Club. Aid for Women, helpaidforwomen.org is the website. Helpaidforwomen.org is the website. Mike Huckabee, you can catch him on Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN, Saturday and Sunday, 8 p.m. Chicago time. And you can catch him in Chicago on October 3rd at that Aid for Women dinner. Governor Huckabee, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Dan and Amy.
God bless. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.